Good morning, friends. We're on Chapter 29, Liberace Shows the Way, Portsmouth, Ohio. By the end of the 1990s, Dr. David Proctor was one of the few people doing well in Portsmouth, Ohio. He had himself a $750,000 mansion with a swimming pool, African art, and 2 7-foot bronze storks. He owned a Mercedes, a Porsche, and a red Corvette, rare possessions in the Ohio River Valley. In the late 1980s, the Kentucky Board of Medical Licensure investigated patients' complaints of unethical practices against him. Board agents found that he prescribed opiates aggressively and often without much diagnosis or follow-up. He was found to have violated no Kentucky medical regulation and retained his license, but was placed on probation. In fact, the state records reflected a doctor who prescribed the drugs often, yet discontinued them just as frequently, who consulted other physicians and urged his chronic pain patients to use exercise or physical therapy to control their pain. David Proctor seemed to be searching for solutions to what ailed his patients. A decade later, that had changed. A nurse in California once told me, "When you deal with people who are in pain all day long, after a while you get worn down." Something like that happened to David Proctor. More patient complaints in the 1990s prompted a second state investigation. By then, those records show, he regularly prescribed Valium, Vicodin, the sedative Soma, Xanax, and a steady regimen of Redux diet pills, all without almost no diagnosis or suggestions for other treatments, such as physical therapy. Nor was there any discussion of improving diet as a way to lose weight and reduce pain. As I read the Licensure Board investigative reports, it seemed that many years of deindustrialized America, seeing vulnerable people and manipulative people who used drugs and the government dole to navigate economic disaster, had corroded any medical ethics Proctor once possessed. I went to Portsmouth to see if I could learn more about the doctor, whom locals called the godfather of the pill mill, the man who had started the first business and showed others how it was done. No one in Portsmouth had forgotten David Proctor, though he was long gone by then. Some remembered him fondly. Many said they had gone to his clinic and waited in long lines for dope prescriptions. One of them was Kathy Newman, who in 1996 was a high school cheerleader and the daughter of a contractor. Kathy had just graduated from Portsmouth High School when she broke ribs in a car accident. The emergency room in town was wary of prescribing more than ibuprofen for pain. "You should go see David Proctor," her friend said. "He'll give you something that works." Kathy drove to the South Shore Clinic and walked into a madhouse. The room was packed. People were standing in the aisles, tense and greedy with anticipation. After 3 hours, she got in to see the doctor. Proctor prescribed her Vicodin and spent a half-hour telling her that she would probably have back and hip pain for the rest of her life and thus would need this prescription for that long as well. Newman went along with it, not sure what to think. "I'm scared to death. I'm so young and afraid that I was going to be on this the rest of my life," she said. In fact, those Vicodins led to a 14-year addiction that eventually had Newman shooting up Oxycontin and getting pill prescriptions from half a dozen doctors around town. Years disappeared in zoned-out addiction. She once found herself in an abandoned farmhouse with people she didn't know, unaware of how she got there. A pit bull ran through the living room chased by an enraged rooster. The pain treatment revolution had many faces, and these mostly belonged to well-meaning doctors and dedicated nurses. But in the Rust Belt, another kind of pain had emerged. Waves of people sought disability as a way to survive as jobs departed. Legions of doctors arose who were not so well-meaning, or who simply found a livelihood helping people who were looking for a monthly government disability check as a solution to unemployment. By the time the pain revolution changed U.S. medicine, the Ohio River Valley had a class of these docs. They were an economic coping strategy for a lot of folks. They charged cash for each visit and were quick with the prescription pad, willing to go along with whatever the patient claimed was pain, wherever the patient claimed he had it. Then along came Oxycontin. If heroin was the perfect drug for drug traffickers, Oxycontin was ideal for these pill mill doctors. The drug had several things going for it, as far as they were concerned. First, it was a pharmaceutically produced pill with a legal medical use. Second, it created addicts, and not just among those who looked to abuse it, but among many who came in search of pain relief. Every patient who was prescribed the drug stood a chance of soon needing it every day. These people were willing to pay cash. They never missed an appointment. If diagnosis wasn't your concern, a clinic was a low overhead operation. A rented building, a few waiting rooms, some office staff, and bouncers. These clinics did require bouncers. They also required a physician with a DEA registration number that permitted him to prescribe federally designated Schedule II narcotics like Oxycontin. Prescriptions for Schedule II drugs had to be written each month by a doctor for a patient, who had to come to the office in person. That meant a monthly visit fee from every patient, $2.50 usually, and that kept waiting rooms full and cash rolling in. Among the very first docs in America to figure out the potency of Oxycontin was was David Proctor in Portsmouth, Ohio. He believed all his patients. Not only that, he encouraged them to believe in imaginary pain. Injured people start going to him, and he gives them this new, wonderful medicine, Oxycontin, said Lisa Roberts, a public health nurse in Portsmouth who had worked with Proctor years before at a hospital where he had privileges. Soon they're getting addicted. They'd say, "My pain's getting worse," and he'd increase the dose. I started seeing people I know who are hard-working, decent people acting all bizarre, rolling cars, stealing. Danny Colley, who grew up in Portsmouth's rough East End neighborhood, watched Proctor's gradual corruption. Proctor had been his family's doctor when he was a child. At 20, now fully involved in the drug world, Colley visited his former doctor's clinic. Proctor was the first cash-only doc around, and was by then prescribing Xanax and Lortabs for everything. Later, he became the first to prescribe Oxycontin for Colley. His clinic was full. He was the one guy, and he was burning it down, Colley said. When he gave me my Lortabs, he said, "Put these under your tongue and let them melt. Do not snort them." When I got my first oxys, he told me to be careful, but that I could snort those. His exact words. He gave me the same thing he said he was taking. He's giving me the dope I need so I'm not sick. I thought he was my dude. I thought he was looking out for me. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. Colley went to Proctor after being injured on a job. He got workers' comp to pay for my medicine for a year and a half, Colley said. He was helping with that. He had a photographic fucking memory. We all thought he was the smartest person in the world. He was brilliant, but he was a crook. Local doctors took a cue from Proctor. Dr. John Lilly opened in downtown Portsmouth. He had lines out the door, too, and after that, things opened wide. Kathy Newman noticed it wasn't just the unscrupulous docs. It seemed every physician in town was under the influence of Opiate's remarkable pain-killing potential. Anyhow, she could find no doctor in Portsmouth offering a pain solution that didn't involve opiates. They'd be like, "Well, let's try you on Lorset 10s. Oh, that didn't work for a month. Let's move you on to 20s. Kathy Newman said, "Within 3 months of me telling them that Vicodin 5s aren't working anymore, I was on Oxy 20s, paying cash all the way." Doctors prescribed those drugs. The other truth, though, is the opiates were all most patients demanded in southern Ohio by then. 50 miles away, an addict who sometimes went by the name of Jeremy Wilder saw easy money and grabbed it. Wilder, a tall, lanky guy with a heavy Appalachian drawl, was raised downriver from Portsmouth in the one stoplight town of Aberdeen, situated between 2 power plants in Brown County. Jeremy was a union carpenter, but he grew up around the kind of moral ambivalence that characterized life in the small Ohio River Valley towns as the Rust Belt took shape. The easy money got the better of him. In 1995, Jeremy heard that Dr. Fortune Williams had been hired by Dr. David Proctor to start up a clinic out in Garrison, Kentucky. Williams was the first doc Jeremy went to as he emerged as one of the first pill dealers in his county. He paid Williams $250 for the visit and $200 more for prescriptions that included Oxycontin. Jeremy later found a doctor in Williamsburg, Ohio, and another in Portsmouth to supply him with pills as well. I met Jeremy as I traveled the heartland of the opiate plague, bisected by the Ohio River. Through him, I realized that as the pain revolution spread, powered by Oxycontin, the area once starved for health care had seen doctors descend on it like locusts. By the mid-1990s, Jeremy Wilder was the biggest pill dealer in Aberdeen, while still working carpentry jobs in Cincinnati and around southern Ohio. He had a window in his house in which users in the area literally beat a path. At first, Jeremy didn't use the drugs he sold, but one night at a party he broke down and snorted an oxy. That was it. Soon he was selling to support his habit. Then in Cincinnati one day, he couldn't find oxys. A neighbor of his Cincinnati connection could get something else, black tar heroin. Jeremy balked. He wanted no part of heroin, but the next day he couldn't take the dope sick anymore. The guy phoned a Mexican who brought over small balloons of black tar heroin. Jeremy never took pills again. For the next 2 years he barely existed. He drove daily to Cincinnati to buy pills from a woman and his tar from the Mexicans. He sold the pills to pay for the heroin he used. For a while, each balloon he bought from the Mexicans came with a paper attached and a phone number. Call any time. He never forgot that. He guessed they were just starting out. He was new to heroin and wondered if all traffickers marketed like that, but figured they did not. In late 1998, Jeremy Wilder, from the town of Aberdeen in rural Brown County, was among the first in southern Ohio to make the transition from Oxycontin to heroin. He was not the last. About that year, reports from the Kentucky Board of Medical Licensure's second investigation into David Proctor began telling strange tales. He was losing all control, manipulating damaged and addicted women for sex. Motherfucker. One upset Kentucky medical inspector who reviewed dozens of Proctor patient records during the late 1990s used terms like gross incompetence, negligence, and malpractice. Proctor, the inspector wrote, didn't even record a patient's height, weight, pulse, or temperature. David Proctor's records are extremely poor, and I am unable to tell what exactly was prescribed in each visit from his notes, he wrote. Of a second Proctor patient, there is significant lack of evidence or of evaluation and alternative treatment to this patient except for the use of controlled substances. And a third, there did not appear to be any type of practice of medicine involved except the description of symptoms by the patient and the doctor writing for controlled substances. I do not believe this constitutes the practice of medicine. Patient complaints prompted the investigation. Among them, 3 women reported they repeatedly had sex with Proctor in his office at his insistence in exchange for prescriptions. One said Proctor pushed her to have sex with him, threatening not to give her an office job or help with her husband's workers' compensation claim if she did not allow him to lick her vagina, though her toddler son was in the room when he did it. Another went to Proctor for depression that grew from an abortion she had had at 18. On the first visit, she said Proctor told her to write a letter outlining all her problems, which they would review. With each visit, she would write a letter about her emotional problems, which he would review, and then have sex with her. After a few such visits, the letter reading was dispensed with, and the doctor got straight to the sex. On the last of 20 visits, she took a drug overdose in his office, and he had a nurse drive her home. After that, she told investigators, she entered drug rehab. In November 1998, Proctor had a car accident. He claimed it left him with short-term memory loss, unable to practice medicine. People were skeptical. Some suggested Proctor used the injuries as a ruse, saying he could no longer remember where certain patients' records were or how he had treated them. Either way, he relinquished his medical license to the state of Kentucky, but kept his pain clinic open. He hired doctors from across the country to staff it, docs for whom the job of wantonly prescribing opiates was the only one available. In the hollowing out of small-town America, the pill mill doc was a kind of coup de grace. In so many towns, locally owned businesses had expired. Family diners were replaced by Applebee's and town hardware stores by Home Depot. Then Ersatz pain physicians replaced family docs and became about the only health care some towns had. Around northern Kentucky and southern Ohio, Proctor's docs were initially hailed for coming to the area. In truth, they were vinegar in the mouth of a crucified region. In the 3 years following his car accident, Proctor hired 15 doctors. They arrived with histories of drug use, previously suspended licenses, and mental problems, ready to prescribe while working for Proctor for $2,500 a week. Some of these doctors stayed. They learned the business. Then they left to set up their own pain clinics in nearby small towns, taking with them office staff trained by Proctor. One Kentucky lawman dubbed him Ray Kroc for the man who spread McDonald's restaurants nationwide. Proctor's business model spread like a virus, unleashing unstable doctors on a vulnerable region. Dr. Frederick Cohn worked for Proctor before relocating to an abandoned supermarket in the town of Paintsville, population 3,400, in eastern Kentucky, where he saw as many as 146 patients a day, 3 minutes each, while lines formed outside. Cohn had pre-printed prescriptions for various narcotics, including Oxycontin, Lortab, Soma, and Xanax. He prescribed the same pills in the same amounts over and over throughout the day, no matter the patient's complaint. 2.7 million pills in 1 year. Dr. Stephen Snyder worked for Proctor for several months in 1999 before leaving to start his own pain clinic. Snyder once had his medical license suspended in Indiana and Florida for drug use. He was a longtime drug user. But in 1987, apparently unaware of his past, the state of Kentucky granted him an osteopath's license. While working for Proctor, Snyder was addicted to Loracet and was injecting Oxycontin while writing narcotic prescriptions 10 and 12 hours a day. He told a DEA investigator that he often split prescriptions with patients, supplying his habit and that of his wife. Dr. Fortune Williams worked for Proctor before moving to Garrison, Kentucky, where he worked in a clinic owned by Nancy Sadler, a former Proctor employee. On some days, he saw patients for 90 seconds at a time and issued 46,000 controlled substance prescriptions for a total of 2.3 million pills in 9 months. Dr. Rodolfo Santos worked in Proctor's office for a while, during which time at least one of his patients died. An investigator wrote that Santos displayed gross ignorance, gross negligence, gross incompetence, and a level of care that I would not find acceptable in a first-year medical student. Santos said he knew he was dealing with addicted patients who lied and scammed drugs from him, and that he was trying to educate them. Who will help them? He told an investigator. As the pain revolution spread across the country, so too did pain clinics. Places where people in pain went for treatment, most often in the form of the opiate painkillers that were now accepted in modern medicine. The pain clinic became a business model, repeated over and over, and many were legitimate. But the business also attracted doctors who were unethical and compromised from the start. Even doctors whose intentions were honorable occasionally had their scruples worn out and warped by the temptation and constant pressure from pain patients and drug-seeking addicts. In either case, many clinics became places where doctors dispensed prescriptions like candy for cash and became known as pill mills. Once these businesses got going, they didn't just prescribe opiate painkillers such as Vicodin or Oxycontin. There also emerged in the wake of David Proctor a taste in the Rust Belt in Appalachia for the class of psychoactive drugs known as benzodiazepines. Valium was the first benzo, but Xanax bars were the most popular. As Proctor showed his clients, benzodiazepines combined with opiates were especially potent and addictive. Both were depressants and very dangerous when taken together. But addicts grew to love the two together as benzos seemed to enhance the euphoria of the opiates. The combined prescription of opiates and benzos was a hot ticket at pill mills in Portsmouth and elsewhere. I asked a detective seasoned by investigations into many of these clinics to describe the difference between a pill mill and a legitimate pain clinic. Look at the parking lot, he said. If you see lines of people standing around outside, smoking, people getting pizza delivered, fistfights, and traffic jams. If you see people in pajamas who don't care what they look like in public, that's a pill mill. And that's what popped up all over Portsmouth, growing from David Proctor's first clinic. Proctor, meanwhile, gained the DEA's attention. The agency launched an investigation into Plaza Healthcare. Proctor pleaded guilty to conspiring to distribute prescription medication. Then he fled to Canada with a Cincinnati bail bondswoman who was neither his wife nor his mistress, a few days before he was to be sentenced. They were captured at the Canadian border with $40,000 and plane tickets to the Cayman Islands. His lawyer, Gary Rocky Billiter, aided the escape. Proctor was returned to Kentucky, where he had already testified against Drs. Williams and Santos in court in return for a lighter sentence in his own case. He eventually served 11 years in prison. Santos and Williams also went off to prison, as did Cohn and Snyder and Billiter. With that, the era of the pill mill owned by doctors from out of town drew to a close in Portsmouth, Ohio. David Proctor ended up at the federal prison and hospital in Lexington, Kentucky, that was once the narcotic farm. I wrote to him there, toward the end of his sentence, asking to hear what he had to say about Portsmouth, pills, pain clinics, and his legacy. He declined, and a year later was released. As the pain revolution was taking hold across the country, however, Proctor and his physician progeny showed a beat-down region a brand new business model. Before long, some of the first locally owned businesses in years opened in Portsmouth, known to folks in town as the Pain Managements. Have a good day, friends.